Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to study about topic friction. So we are going to study about what are different types of friction. We can identify different kinds of friction and what are the causes of friction and how it affects the motion of the body. As you can see in the given picture, there are two men A and B, and from these two pictures we can determine that the person who is skiing, he is moving more faster in comparison to the person who is on grass. So friction is that force that opposes motion between two surfaces. If we magnify the diagram that is present between two objects, we will see that there are microscopic hills and valleys that are present on the rough surfaces. If we see the arrow on the right hand side, the black arrow depicts the motion in which we are applying the force, and the red arrow depicts the motion in which we are applying the force in opposite direction. We can see from given picture that these microscopic hills and valleys, they when they come into when they come into contact with each other, they cause frictional force. So the frictional force is caused by these microscopic hills and valleys. The frictional force is determined by two factors. These are roughness of the surfaces and the force that is pushing together and the force that is pushing these surfaces. So the friction depends on roughness of the surface and the force applied on the object. Now let us see this animation, and can you determine the rule will move farthest on which surface? Let us see from the animation. So as you can see from the animation, the rule moves farthest on smooth surface. So this is the reason for determining that friction is less on smooth surface and more on rough surfaces, because rough surfaces have more hills and valleys. Now from these two examples, can you determine which object will have more friction? The answer is the block with 100 pounds will have more friction, because friction depends on the force applied on the motion of the body. The block with 100 pounds will require more force, so it will have more friction. As I said earlier, friction depends on roughness of the body and the force or the weight of the body. Now, when we talk about fluids and gases, the case becomes different, because in that, friction depends upon the surface area. You can see from both the pictures that the grown man will have more surface area in comparison to a baby. So frictional force will be more when they are applied when we have more surface area. This amount of surface area affects the friction of moving object. For example, air resistance, which uh, air resistance that happens due to parachute, the resistance of object when it glides through water. The amount of surface area which is in contact with two solids determines in two solids the amount of surface area does not determine the force of the body because it becomes tangentially divided when we are rolling the object on the slope. There are different types of frictions. These are sliding friction, fluid friction, rolling friction, and static friction. Sliding friction is that object which opposes motion of the body when we are pushing the object. For example, whenever we are writing or whenever we are combing, then we get sliding friction. Fluid friction is that friction which offers resistance when there is air drag or resistance to the body. This is known as fluid friction. Rolling friction is friction that occurs between rolling body. For example, rolling tires of bike and bowling ball. Static friction is that friction that occurs when the surface is stationary. For example, this potted plant, which is in stationary motion, also faces some friction due to hills and valleys present between both the objects. Now there are different ways to reduce the friction. We can smoothen the surface. We can use lubricant. We can use wheels, and we can apply less force. In these ways, we can reduce the friction on the body. Different ways to increase friction. If surface is rough, if we replace sliding object with rolling, if we use roller object instead of sliding, if we apply more force, then the hills and valleys are pushed together. Now, among sandpaper, carpet, and gravel, which will have the most friction? The answer is sandpaper will have most friction because it has most hills and valleys. Among ice, glass, and tile, ice will have the least amount of friction because it is smoothest of all three. Friction is necessary evil. If there was no friction, then we will not be able to walk. As you can see from the given picture, when the friction is not present, then this polar bear will slip on the ice. So friction is necessary evil. You can see from the given pictures which depict why friction is necessary. Friction prevents us from slipping when we are walking. Friction helps us to stop a moving object. Friction helps us to keep objects stationary. The heat caused by friction helps us to make fire. Friction helps us in gripping things. Friction helps us in sharpening the knife. As you can see from this picture, these basketball players, whenever they are moving on this smooth surface, the friction prevents them from slipping on the ground. So that's why friction is necessary. But whenever we are doing cycling, friction causes lot of problem. We have to apply a lot more effort. So that's why this youngster on left hand side, he is lubricating his cycle to reduce the friction. So friction has both good and bad sides. That's why friction is called necessary evil. Now different things that are given below: water, ball bearings, oil, liquid soap, steel rods, foam rubber. Out of all these things, the object that will not help us in reducing friction is foam rubber, because foam rubber, whenever we move a heavy object on foam rubber, it will not help us because the rubber has many hills and valleys, so it will increase the friction. Three common items that might help us in increasing friction are sandpaper, carpet, and gravel. These three are the items that will help us in increasing the friction. So that's all for the friction. If you have any questions regarding friction, you can reach me out to my you can reach me out on my email ID adityamehra@gmail.com. Thank you everyone.